Several years ago, a young writer rented a remote lakeside cabin in the mountains so he could free himself of distractions and interruptions while he worked on his next novel. In his first week, he managed to accomplish an impressive amount of work, and even though the feelings of being isolated and lonely were ever present, he still felt as if someone was there watching him. Then, late on a Sunday afternoon, he heard what he thought was someone calling his name. He quickly disregarded this and put it down to having become overly perceptive to noises and his creative imagination running wild. Then it happened again.
Peter.
And again.
Peter.
And then it was so clear he had no doubt it was his name that was being called.
Peter.
He left his desk and went over to the window to see where it was coming from. In a large, old house not far away from his cabin, which he previously thought was unoccupied, was a small boy who was clearly calling his name.
Peter.
And waving at him. The man was extremely unsettled by this and waved back to the boy. The boy then moved away from the window, and the man was left standing there, wondering how the hell this boy knew his name. He pondered the possibilities, and finally figured that the cabin he had rented must have belonged to the family who lived there, and the agent had gone and let them know who he was. A little annoyed at this, but not letting it get to him, he returned to his work. A few nights later, while he was sleeping, he heard his name being called again.
Peter.
Once again, he first thought it was the wind, but soon became so clear there was no doubt.
Peter.
His child was calling his name again. He got up and went over to the window. To his shock, the little boy was standing outside his window, wearing nothing but a pair of shorts. The little boy smiled at him and said,
Peter, teach me to swim.
The man thought he must be dreaming. What the hell is going on, he thought. He scowled back at the boy. No, it's the middle of the night. Go home. The little boy's sweet smile suddenly turned to one of anger, and he turned and ran back to the old house across the way. The man, angry and still in disbelief, returned to his bed. But with this strange event playing on his mind, he could not fall asleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, tired and angry, he went over to the old house to talk to the parents of the small child. He knocked on the door and was slightly taken aback when an old lady answered the door. He got straight to it. Did you know your little boy was out last night? He came to my window and asked to go swimming. The old lady looked at him, her face turning to anger. To his surprise, her face then turned to sadness, and tears began to roll down her face. This is a very cruel joke, she said to him. What are you talking about? He asked. My little boy drowned in the lake 20 years ago, she said. A chill instantly ran through the man. But what about, he began. But before he could finish, she slammed the door and left him standing there, confused and scared. He went back to the cabin, and that night, he again did not manage to get one wink of sleep as he pondered if he really had seen the little boy, or if he was slowly going insane. After a few sleepless nights and unsettled days, he found he had hit a wall with his writing and just couldn't continue his work. He felt he needed to take a break and refocus. The weather had warmed up slightly, so he decided a relaxing swim would be exactly what he needed to help him clear his head and put the strange happenings behind him. He ventured into the water and immediately felt better. He floated on his back and contentedly let all the stress and worry float away. Then suddenly he heard it again.
Peter.
The muffled sound of the boy calling his name. Where was it coming from? He heard it again.
Peter.
It was then he realized it was below him. He ducked his head into the water and saw him, slowly floating up toward him. The unsettling smile on his face suddenly changed to a look of pure evil as he then latched onto his ankle. Incredibly distressed, the man tried to scramble for the surface, but he couldn't shake it off and was slowly pulled into the cold, deep darkness to his death. Weeks later, after the man's publisher failed to get in contact with him, the police were sent out to try and make contact. They would never find him. What became of him is only known by the eyes that watch over the cabin and your every move. On a dark autumn night, a lady who had just finished conducting a training session at a factory in the countryside stood alone at a bus stop, patiently waiting for the bus to arrive and take her back into the city. 10 minutes had passed. The bus should have arrived by now, she thought to herself, and yet there she still was, waiting. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. A man was slowly approaching towards the bus stop, and her. Please don't be a weirdo, she thought to herself. Where the hell is this bus? Sure enough, when the person entered the light of the bus stop, she was filled with a feeling of dread. He looked homeless and reeked of a foul odor. $3, he said. Excuse me? She replied. $3, he repeated. I'm sorry, I don't have $3, she replied. And then he just stood there, silently staring at her. She became quite afraid at this point and was about to ask him to move away when he spoke again. $3. She had had enough. This guy was genuinely giving her the creeps, and she felt scared and vulnerable. Look, I don't have $3, she snapped at him. Now leave me alone, or I'll call the police. He looked at her, then he looked around, and then just left. He walked past her and headed on his way down the road into the night. He had moved on, but this certainly didn't make her feel any better. She replayed in her head what had just transpired, and then quickly began to think of what she should do next. She was all alone in an unfamiliar area, waiting for a bus that looked like it would never come. Now she felt extremely frightened. What if he came back? What would she do then? As she decided to get her phone and call a taxi, the bus arrived. Oh, thank goodness, she thought. And as soon as the door opened, she jumped aboard and took a seat. Her heart was racing, but she was safe. The door closed, and she asked the driver, "How much?" The driver replied, $3, as he knocked her unconscious, switched out the lights, and then drove away, off into the night. The day was warm and the weather was perfect. Perfect for a day in the park. A young mother and her little girl relaxed contentedly on the lush green grass, breathed in the fresh summer air, and listened to the world go by. The little girl, lying down on her back, was entertaining herself by trying to make out the different objects in the clouds. She laughed as she made out a pig, followed by a mouse that looked like it was chasing some cheese. She could do this for hours, as her overactive imagination never failed to entertain her. Then, she became a little scared as she saw what she thought was the face of a demon floating by. It stared right at her and sent a chill through her body. She closed her eyes and waited a few moments, and then when she opened them again, it was gone. She felt relieved by this, but didn't feel like continuing her game. She shut her eyes and tried to think happy thoughts, as she just focused on breathing in the fresh air and relaxing in the sun. To the left of them, a foul ball from a baseball field flew over the fence and straight toward where she and her mother were sitting. At the last second, the mother reached out and caught the ball. If she hadn't, it would have smashed into the little girl's skull at full speed. The mother, furious at how careless these baseball players were, decided to head over to the field and give them a piece of her mind. "Don't go anywhere," she said to the little girl as she walked away into the distance. The little girl lay back down and closed her eyes. She didn't want to look at the clouds anymore. She felt sick. She just wanted her mother to come back so they could go home. A few moments passed. However, when the little girl opened her eyes again, the day had turned to night and there was no one around. Not a sound to be heard. "Mama!" she called, but there was no answer. "Mama!" she called again, but still there was nothing. She was frightened and all alone. And then she saw her. A small child, a girl, was sitting on the swing, all alone. The little girl looked around for her mother or for anyone else, but there was no one. It was just her and this scary little child. "Who are you?" the little girl called out, but the girl on the swing didn't answer. In the blink of an eye, she was closer. And another, closer still. They were now face to face with each other. "Who are you?" she asked again. The girl looked up, and a deathly chill ran through the little girl as she looked into her own eyes, which was followed by a chilling, "I'm you." She grabbed the little girl by the neck, and although there was a struggle, there was no way she could stop being dragged down into the depths of the earth and into the afterlife. On a cold and dark Friday night, a young couple had just completed their long journey into the mountains for a weekend away at an extremely secluded and exclusive resort hotel. Earlier that day, the man had surprised his girlfriend by picking her up from work with her bags already packed. The girl was very impressed and was excited to stay at what looked like a beautiful and luxurious hotel. When they entered the lobby, they were slightly unsettled that not only was there no one at the reception to greet them, there was no one to be seen anywhere. At first she thought that her boyfriend had failed to make a booking, but then she noticed their key, just left on the desk with a tag that read, "Davis, room 75. Figuring that the hotel had some staffing issues, they took the key and made their way up to the room. When they got to their room, they were both a little surprised at what they saw. The furnishings of the room were extremely dated. In fact, it was so old there was no ensuite bathroom. They would have to use the communal one, which was located all the way at the other end of the cold, dark hallway. The room also had iron bars on the inside of the windows. For security reasons, they figured, but it still certainly seemed a bit off-putting and did nothing to add to a warm, romantic atmosphere. They decided they could bear this for one night, and once they managed to see some staff members, they would ask for another room, or just leave. They got settled in, and the woman ventured down the hall and enjoyed a nice hot shower. At least the water is hot and the bathroom is clean, she thought to herself. It was then she thought she heard voices. She turned off the water and listened intently. What she heard next chilled her to the bone. It was a man's voice, saying they would come tonight to take the girl. This sent a shiver through her spine, and she immediately finished her shower in order to get out of there. She peered out from behind the door, expecting to see someone, and, to her surprise, the hallway was completely empty. She went back to the room and then told her boyfriend what she had heard. He told her she was crazy, as he's had a look around while she was showering. There was no one in the entire hotel. It would appear that they're completely alone. They went to bed, and were surprised at how comfortable the bed actually was. They both drifted off to sleep quickly. That was until the woman heard a noise. "Someone's trying to get in," she thought. She called out to her partner. "Dave, someone's coming," she said. "Don't be ridiculous," he said. "It's probably the wind. Look, we're completely safe. The door is locked and bolted, and the windows have bars, right? No one can get in here." This made her feel mildly better. However, she still couldn't fully get settled, especially since what she had heard earlier had crawled back into her mind. Suddenly, she heard a noise again. Then she looked over the end of the bed at the fireplace. "The fireplace," she thought. "They're going to come down the chimney." She got out of bed and looked up the chimney. "Dave, wake up," she said. "The chimney's not secure. They might come down here." Dave had woken up. In fact, he'd been awake the entire time, waiting to open the door. He let in two men in dark robes. They entered the room and stared directly at the girl. The girl knew they had come for her. She tried to scream, but couldn't. "What the hell is going on?" she thought. "Dave, what have you done? Why?" It appeared that he didn't care at all. Dave did nothing as the two cloaked figures moved closer and closer to his girl. They grabbed the girl and dragged her down the hall, off into the darkness. As it turns out, a week earlier, Dave had incurred some massive losses at a mafia-run blackjack game. He had no way to pay his debts, so he offered up his girlfriend. They accepted, and then they set up the stay at the hotel to make it happen. Dave left the hotel, relieved that his debt was clear, without a hint of guilt at what he'd just done.